Next up, we have Afek. He's the CEO and co-founder at Spacemesh, and he's going to teach us about lessons learned from the evolution of cryptocurrencies. As you might have noticed from his panel, he's a great human, and at Spacemesh, he's on a mission to build the fairest possible decentralized economic infrastructure. Prior to Spacemesh, Tomer was the CEO of Convert Media, which was acquired by Tabula, and before that, he was an investor at Evergreen Partners. Please give him a warm welcome. Tomel.
Yeah, I've been spoken to you guys about a month ago, I think it was, and I've been called back, so apparently I wasn't that bad at the... yeah, so building Spacemesh is something like a 5 years process. I want to tell you a little bit about why I am optimistic, why I'm seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, why I think that by basically fixing money, we can fix this crazy world. Let's see if I can make it right. No. How would I switch slides? So what I am to convince you is that the problem that we're facing, all the multidimensional, multifold problems that we're facing are coming from something like a shared origin. And all right, so, that's like the Ariel. All right, never mind. So basically everybody's doing what is best for them in the short term, creating something like a devastation for everybody on the long term. That is very characteristics of the games that we play now. We see something like a Moloch type, multipolar traps, where, for example, I don't want to have an atomic bomb, but if I want, he will, and then he will win, and he's way more evil than I am, so I gotta have it. And those kind of rationalizations of evil things all the way down. And a general feel that the trust is decaying and decaying and decaying, and to be a trustful human is something like for losers. And that cannot be. That cannot be something like the ideal situation. And all these problems, the way Daniel Schmachtenberger refers to them is that they are leveraged intelligence unbound by wisdom. Okay, so there is something like circularity of a money system, and there is something like a human that is doing self-reflexive process, and nothing confused this human in terms of having him reassess his older beliefs, and as a result, he's just going turbo straight all in, and this is kind of like a problem. I think that this problem is, there are two ways to tell this story. One way is to tell the story from an economic standpoint. The attack on the twins led the Americans to say something like, everybody go shopping, because that was an idea to increase demand and to heal the economy from demand. That led the US to basically excessively shop for some 2 decades until the 2008, devastating crisis and the money printing and the bailout. So I think the Western is doing repeating mistakes since the Twin Tower disaster, and money printing is one of those ways where they're trying to release themselves out of that situation, and that's bad. The other thing is basically the abandoning of the gold standard and the replication of that with something like a a circular money system. What one must understand is that circular money system, when compared with a gold standard money system, you lose a dimension. Basically, when you have something that can separate the quality from the quantity, when you have something like, we go to play Monopoly together, and I come with huge amount of chips, and you come with your modest 4 chips, and I win you every time, or something like that. That's just bad, right? I mean, if Monopoly is a game that you play until you run out of money, then obviously, it's not fair if we come up with different amounts. But, for example, the ability to make it relative as opposed to absolute, the ability to say something like, okay, you come with 4, I come with 400, I end up with 600, you end up with 8. You win. Why? Because you doubled your initial amount, whereas I only made 1.5 my initial amount. So what gold enabled us is to separate quality from quantity, and the abandoning of the gold standard has made us unwillingly sort of drift towards accepting the richest person truth as truth. And when we want to think about how we can possibly have arrived here, we need to understand that this idea of flat world, this idea of finding what is true, only scientists, and finding what is valuable, everybody via economy. So it really doesn't work. It really doesn't work. How you find what is true and how you find what is valuable must reinforce one another. They cannot be separated in such a way. And what we're seeing right now, as a result of those self-referential loops and the circular economy, is basically a difficulty to separate facts from beliefs, and some real serious fragmentation. And actually, the main point here is that eyes on your back. None of humans have that. We all take some samples from reality, and then we say, okay, this is everything. Right? Our reality, as we sample it, and then we extrapolate into some imaginary spaces, and we say, okay, that's everything. What we don't see, what is not part of our daily lives, in some weird sense, doesn't exist for us. And since the dawn of time, humans were aware of that weakness, aware of the fact that they can confuse themselves when they look outside, aware of the fact that they need modesty and they need something like, they have a blind spot. Every human have a blind spot. None of us is actually objective. And we need help from the outside to note our bias, because there really is no way for us to notice it within us. This Gödel incompleteness theorem is really nice. I think Gödel proved that in mathematics there is something like a self-referential gap. And if you note, with humans, we also have these self-referential gaps where sometimes egos, either individual ego or group ego, go, flying out. And those basically blind spot is the same thing. It's the blind spot to my own self-value. That is also what is happening with collective illusions. Collective illusions, let me describe this as something like, I go along with something I don't agree with because I think everybody else thinks that way, but they don't. It's just all of us are going after something that is not true for any of us, and we're all cooperating. And that's like, the emperor's new clothes, and that being referred to throughout human many, many times. And what I seek to convey here is why better money can solve this problem. So yeah, I'm going to skip through a lot of that. I think that in the background, what is happening is that effort to abandon what was the, Platonic logic towards something like a perfect scientific language whereby you can place language on some mathematical foundations really failed us. So at the beginning there was a Platonic scale, which was basically what is true for this is true for everybody. That didn't work. There are obviously some things that are locally true and not globally true. But the move to say, okay, everything is now relative. What's true for you and what's true for me. If we don't agree, you think we need to bury the dead. I think we need to burn the dead. And by the fact we don't agree, we decide that there is no right and wrong, and right, when in Rome, do like in Rome, right? And when in Paris, do like in Paris, and so on. But that's also a bad move. It's a bad move because if you and I don't agree, it doesn't mean that there is no better answer. Right? So the ability to tell these apart, what is relative, what is absolute, what is local, what is global, this is the main thing that we're trying to solve. And yeah, basically money is the way we coordinate human action. Right now, the way the system is built, very simple. I have my own goal. I don't care about what externalities I create. And because the competition becomes harder and harder, because the atmosphere effect becomes tighter and tighter, I'm just externalizing as much harm to the environment as I possibly can. And how can we make sustainability profitable? How can we change the incentive scheme so that they support what is, what society would want them to do? How can we possibly achieve that? So it's important to understand that money is something that has relative value, basically was used in markets as barter, right? So the fact that I am hungry now and I have an intuition for how much I would pay for food, right? I would give you one rabbit for your great meal. And now we carve out something like money, like a denominator. But that denominator doesn't have instinctive value which I can replace with other things. It doesn't have that. So I am basically, you remember we just said that humans have a blind spot? So I'm feeding basically into that blind spot. Instead of helping humans with their disadvantage, I am kind of using the fact that people are blind to the changes in the amount of money, which would change. Let's say this. I took your great, basically, lunch and I gave you some money instead of giving you the rabbit. We expect that 5 months after that, that same money would buy you a rabbit, right? Because previously you wanted to exchange this. No, it doesn't work like that. Obviously, no. The way the commodities relate to one another is constantly fluxing, right? So, imagine this idea of, in our university, diversity is a value, right? Imagine that. So, the default of white, and then you measure distance from white to every other color scheme. And if you don't understand what's the problem with that, then there is something like, the way you are blind to all these things which are happening and changing, which are not reflective in the distance between you as the default and the rest of the thing. And why does the gold standard fix that? Why does something like a commodity that has its own value, irrespectful of what we're trying to exchange, solve this problem? Well, that's where the beauty of it is. If you are getting high on your own supply and you think your ego is now something else and you price a lot of things in accordance with that inflated self-esteem, there is an incentive, there is a speculative incentive which is basically minimizing free energy in the system. It's all the time creating a down, or let's say centripetal force, which is I have a personal gain from the fact that you are high on your own supply, and I will bet against you and make money from that. And as a result, And what I seek to convey, which is the deepest point, is that in our body, the heart and the lungs are not the boss of one another. Okay, and there is a famous saying in Judaism that Arevim ze laze, right? So the point is that we need to keep each other in check. And the type of relationship where you have what to lose and I have what to lose, and we keep each other in check, and now we extend that to something like we keep 1 million people and they keep each other in check. That dynamic, you can imagine it as like a scale. Scale of the kind we see here, but instead of scaling something like gold, you're scaling maps. You're scaling maps of how do we price different things, and each coin has got some gold in it, right, or some commodity in it, and now if I see those arbitrages between the amount of gold and what the commodity buys here and there, for the gold's sake, I can exchange between economies, and that, as I explained, creates something like a free energy minimization process, which is essential. Why is it essential? Again, remember we have a blind spot. Remember we don't see what we don't see. Remember we need to change our assumptions. And remember that for as long as we're chasing the same thing, I'm blind. So how do my blindness appears in front of my eyes and forcing me to notice it? That's the main idea that I seek to convey, and that's the main reason that we'd be able to deliver on those interest in being the sustainable solution can have a profit motive, and us can get there. So yeah, I think cryptocurrency is obviously the way to implement the gold standard in the digital domain. However, the commodity, what was once gold, because we're moving to the digital domain, we need digital commodity. And nonetheless, for as long as this commodity is representative of the rest of the commodities and it maintains some balance with them, this is good. And I want to touch upon a very last point before I continue, which is why do we need to care about the material circumstances when we refer to our society, right? It's not trivial at all, because nature doesn't care about our culture. And why should our culture then care about nature? And yeah, so the famous story is that the Eskimos used to kill their babies, especially the baby girls, by the way, when they were born. And nowadays we're saying, wow, right, what cruel people. But it turns out that they couldn't possibly sustain more than 3 kids. They were carrying them in the hands, they were moving from place to place, had no birth control. And actually the most humane thing to do was to kill the baby at birth and before it, have feelings and humanity. So we can be super judgmental about other people from our frame of reference. We don't notice that we measure them by our own culture, and this is just plain evil. And think about, again, all those young boys that are trying to impress some nice girl, and think about, the effort, and then think about the way a white person can come and say, this is like worth nothing. This is a car? Tesla is a car, right? So those things, we need to find a way to kind of push back against them, and gold standard is the answer for that. And yeah, culture, the way culture was used in the past is basically to generate positive sum interaction and to create spaces where you can be vulnerable, where people know you for who you really are. And yeah, they can tell you, yo, you're not a guru, man. I know you since you were 5, brother, you're not a guru. Stop with this nonsense. And they can keep you more in line with who you are and with your true calling. And I think it's very obvious right now that we're missing that. I think it's very obvious that the internet can provide a culture which is not related to any state. I think as such, it can shake us from this, elite glasses and ideal standards, and can do some good to the people who thus far have had less of an opportunity. So it's going to be exciting. It's going to be exciting because we're going to have an ability to take our values, code them into smart contract rules, make sure that they are self-reinforcing, and then gold will allow us to basically weight the economies in a relative fashion as opposed to in an absolute fashion. And the way we integrate the different maps into one big map of, what's advisable, what virtues should I copy, and so on, this map can finally have something like weights. And those weights won't say that the richest is more correct. Because, if, say, this point is really crucial to understand. If the US is now expanding their economy, okay, they make a decision to print more money. That action on its own doesn't mean they now deserve to lean more heavily on the collective map. That's ridiculous, and you cannot avoid it if all you know is subtotals. Because you basically folded the dimension of quality, and that's a huge mistake that we'll fix very soon. So now I need to convince you that gold standard is, or like the cryptocurrency version of gold standard is in fact a good solution. And I point you to the things that PeopleCoin can achieve for us. So non-rivalrous versus rivalrous is a very important point, maybe the most important point to understand. So an apple is a rivalrous. Once I eat it, it's gone. You don't have it. Math, anti-rivalrous, right? So the more anti-rivalrous things, or non-rivalrous, or however you want to call it, then the pie is just growing for everybody. So humans both make the pie and secure their share of the pie, and the energy that is spent on increasing the pie and the energy that is spent on securing my share is right now really screwed up due to, prisoner dilemma, quite simply. And we can create different incentive schemes that will allow us to basically incentivize non-rivalrous generation of value for all. So the other thing is those state transitions. Once something like a better situation that is for the benefit of everybody shows itself, you now have the ability to manipulate the payoff function so as to lead people there. You don't want to force them, you don't want to threat them, you want to make it sensible for them to peacefully and collectively migrate there. And lastly, I believe there is something like a commons, a group of people that basically committed their lives to thinking about the flourishing of all life in perpetuity. And those people are being handed up something like an ability to change our payoff function so as to resolve any race condition, any spiraling down dynamics that we want to flip on their head and make them spiral up. So I hope I convince you that there is some big hope to believe that in this fashion we can avoid some of the multipolar traps that we're facing today. But the main problem to solve with blockchains, as all of us know, is this idea of Sybil resistant. When in permissionless settings, there is a main problem whereby I can argue that I'm a million different people and all the money belongs to me, and now you all need to give me your money. So Satoshi brilliantly sidestepped this problem by saying you got to spend something, and in this way. But if you think about the idea of, say, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, think about Bitcoin as a thesis saying you must spend energy to keep a money system honest. You cannot do it without energy. And then coming Ethereum and saying, nah, actually you can. Self-referential loops. And then what I believe is the third generation is, no, you cannot. You cannot do something like because of this idea that I cannot look in my back and I'm blind to, so everything which is autocatalytic, basically, we know what we know and we don't care about outside and we don't learn from the outside. That's a problem for a money system. But the synthesis would be something like, yeah, we gotta spend something to keep the money system honest, but it doesn't have to be as wasteful as Bitcoin. And this is another way to look at the trilemma of security, decentralization, and scalability, and why we are hopeful in Spacemesh that we can overachieve our predecessors. And in order to do that, and shall there be more people coin in the future, I think that those three properties are to be basically zoomed into and focused at. The fairness first means something like incentive compatibility. So every kilobyte on the system gets exactly the same reward. Doesn't matter how fast, how expensive, if it's a magnetic drive, if it's a solid state drive, I don't care. Just every kilobyte. So even if you are joining with the minimum amount of storage, you will be treated as fair as the bigger whale. Lowest barrier to entry means that I don't require you for anything that you don't already have in order to join. And collaboration focus means there's got to be a good way for us to work together instead of fight with one another. Actually, I'm out of time, ideas. I'm sorry, I had a lot more to talk about. Race-free, incentive compatibility. You're very welcome to reach out to me and we can discuss this. Thank you for listening. Peace out.